Our first speaker is Dr. Karsonya Whitehead. She's an associate professor of communication and African American studies at Loyola University of Maryland. She's an award-winning curriculum writer and lesson plan developer, an award-winning former Baltimore City middle school teacher, and a 3-time New York Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker. So she's done all kinds of interesting things. She received her degree from UMBC in language literacy and culture in 2009. She's the author of a number of books, articles, opinion editorials, and is an in-demand motivational speaker and prolific blogger, a guest commentator on WYPR, and a frequent guest host of The Mark Steiner Show on WEAA. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Karsonya Whitehead to the stage. Thank you.
So I consider myself to be a me-searcher, and I have been training for this all my life. I got my first journal at the age of 9, and with the seriousness of a 9-year-old, I began to document all the important things in my life. Mostly boys, but talking about my hair and complaining a lot about my parents. And I continued writing about myself, kind of like navel-gazing, because I felt that I was probably the most important person in the world. I look back at my journals from when I was 11 years old, and somehow or another, I was absolutely convinced that the world revolved around me. And I would say things like, people are too stupid to figure it out, and when they realize how important I am, the world is going to change. Well, I kept doing this me search, and when I got into college, my advisor said, what do you want to major in? I said, I want to major in me. Can you do that? And he said, we don't give BAs in navel gazing, but you probably should go into history. He said, you should put down the diaries and pick up archival research. And so I became a historian. And I continued that through my BA and my MA, thinking about my PhD. And then 15 years ago, something incredible happened. I woke up about 3 a.m. in the morning. It was my 3rd time getting up that evening. And I said, at this point, I think something's happening to me. Something's changing. And I realized that somebody had chosen me to be their mother. And I said, wow, I'm going to be a mother. And I was upset about that because I said, I don't want to have children. And so I did what I always do. I started writing at 3 a.m. in the morning. I wrote a letter to my son in my womb. And I said, you're not going to change me. You're not going to make me into a better person. I'm going to remain who I am. You want my attention? You need to yell to get it. Because you're just a passenger in my body as I go about my life. And so every day I started writing something to him. So the next day, it's like, okay, I found out that you don't like when I eat Cheetos, and I don't understand that because that's my favorite food. Already, you're bending my will to suit your life. And so I began writing, and writing. Every chance I had, I would write my oldest son a letter. And then he was joined by his brother. And so I began writing them letters when they were in the crib, and I would tape it to the wall. So I said, when they roll over and they're crying, they can see my words. Though they can't read them, they'll know they're there. And I would stick them underneath the mattress, and I would tape them to their bottle so that when their nanny took them out, she'd have something to read to them. And as they got older, I began putting letters in their shoes and putting them in their coats, and they would put on their robes, and there'd be a letter in the pocket. And they'd head off to school, and there'd be more letters there. Every letter started with, dear boys, I just want to tell you how important you are. And dear boys, you're superheroes, but you have your capes underneath your clothes. And dear boys, I have the best job in the world. I get to mother you. And even though I haven't learned how to mother myself, I'm working on doing that for you. And so one letter became 10 letters became 15. And when my oldest son, who's now 15, when he turned 14, I realized I had 30 journals of letters to my sons. And I said, we should do something with this. We should publish this. I think the world wants to see what I'm doing. And it became my book, Letters to My Black Sons. And it became, for me, my research. So 4 things that I've learned. The first one is curiosity. And that first thing that was birthed for them in watching themselves grow up on paper actually started here on this campus. When I was working on my PhD, we met Dr. Freeman Rabowski, and he told my boys a story, and they were 5 and 6 years old. And he said how he would wake up every morning and look in the mirror and say, "Good morning, Dr. Hrabowski," from the time he was 10 years old all the way up. People remember this story about Dr. Hrabowski. So I thought that was an amazing story. The next morning, my boys woke up and I heard them in the room. "Good morning, Dr. Whitehead. The White House is calling you. And good morning, Dr. Whitehead. Amtrak wants you." And I said, "This is amazing." I went in the room and said, "Okay, I know why Amtrak is calling. I get that. But why is the White House calling?" And my oldest son said, "Mommy, the world's just falling apart and they need me." "Well, then the White House is calling your name. You need to continue." So I began to document their curiosity. And whenever they would forget who they are, whenever they would fall off the path, I would slip them another letter. I'm like, this me search is taking over my life. I also had this period of discovery where they taught me things about myself. One of my favorite stories is from my youngest son when he was 4 years old. He was upstairs in his room playing, and I heard him at some point, he sneezed out loud, and he yelled out, "God bless you, Amir." And so I brought him downstairs, and I said, "Amir, you're by yourself. When you sneeze, why did you say, 'God bless you, Amir'?" And he said, "Mommy, sometimes when you're by yourself, you gotta bless yourself." I'm like, "You do. Sometimes when you're by yourself, you gotta bless yourself." And so this discovery process for me is finding out about myself through them. So every time I struggled with my research, the work I do at my university, every time I struggle when I'm talking about 19th century black women, and every time I stumble with the writer's block, I pick up one of those letters I wrote to them to remind myself that even if nothing else sticks, I have something living in front of me, words that will continue beyond me that I'm pouring into my boys. There's also this moment of documentation because they picked up the writing process as well. I've taught them how to write and record everything about their lives. I often joke and say that in some households you have a college fund. In my household, we have a therapy fund because one day they're going to say, "Mama, you wrote everything about us. We need to see someone and figure out what was so important about our lives that you could not stop writing." And why is it that you often say nothing stops bad behavior faster than a pencil? Because I know if you start acting up, I'm going to write it down, and a year from now we're going to talk about it. That's how I give my lectures for bad behavior. But watching them birth their own activism. I saw that a lot during this whole protest movement with Freddie Gray. And they documented every day up on their wall what was happening. And when I marched with them for 10 days straight, coming home and all of us pulling out our journals and writing about what happened. And then we would share those notes like I do with my colleagues to see whose version of the story is the right version. And when did these things happen to us? So this discovery and documentation is also birthing the writing genius in them. And then finally, this notion of interpretation, trying to make sense of it all. Why is it that people don't understand that me search is just as significant, just as important, and I would argue in some ways more monumental, more life-changing than simple research? Because the words that I'm pouring into my sons that eventually got poured out into a book are able to touch people beyond me. It's amazing because people do and have read my book about this 19th century black woman, Emily Davis, and they've enjoyed it. But when people read letters to my black sons and they see my love for my sons poured out onto the page, it is a different experience. It's a different way of connecting. It's a way of taking the research off of the page and putting it into your lives. So the ongoing research for me is continuing with the letters. It's publishing the book Letters to My Black Sons, Raising Boys in a Post-Racial America. Going with my boys, we went through the 30 journals and picked out the best ones. We then did Race Brave. My sons asked me if I could write poetry every day about what was happening in Baltimore. That became my third book, Race Brave, New and Selected Works, all about the poetry that we created throughout the protest time. And then writing letters again and reminding them every step of the way that you might forget who you are, you might forget your voice. If you ever have that moment, and I know that you will, call me. Because we can get the journal from whatever year you're talking about, we can pick it up and we can find how you overcame every single obstacle, and we can help you find your way back to yourself. Thank you so much.